Welcome to the Exploring Unschooling podcast. I'm Pam Laricchia, unschooling mom and author, bringing you interviews, information, and inspiration about unschooling and living joyfully with your family. You can find the episode show notes, your free Exploring Unschooling ebook, and lots more information at livingjoyfully.ca. And here's the show. Hello, everyone. I'm Pam Laricchia, and this is episode number 23 of the podcast. It's the 8th of June, 2016, as I record this intro. In this episode, I chat with Ohman about learning to read. The conventional wisdom is that children need to learn to read early, and that makes sense if they're going to school because the whole system is based on reading and writing. Yet, how well does that align with how children actually learn? While it may not be a big issue for children who are naturally early readers, for those who aren't, it can be a very challenging and frustrating path. The beauty of unschooling is that we aren't tied to the school schedule, which allows us to support and engage with our children on their unique reading journey, whatever its timetable. Anne has a unique perspective to share on reading. She has witnessed the reading journeys of her two sons, who've always been unschooled, and she's a library director at a rural library where she engages regularly with school kids around reading. And the stories she shares are fascinating. I hope you enjoy it. A quick update from around here. Yesterday, I got home from my visit with my daughter Lissy in New York City. Her boyfriend's mom came to town for the weekend as well so that we could finally meet in person. Yay! And we all had a great time together. Lots of sightseeing, lots of time to chat. And their apartment is wonderful and unique and inspiring. Lissy has such an artistic eye. I spent ages looking around at all the things she had up on the walls. We even had pizza Friday night, which is a Laricchia tradition, and I showed Lissy and Jacob how to make pizza dough from scratch. I'll post some pictures from the trip on the Living Joyfully Facebook page, and we all agreed that this may just need to be an annual thing. The quote this week is from John Holt. What is most important and valuable about the home as a base for children's growth into the world is not that it is a better school than the schools, but that it isn't a school at all. What I love about this is that it reminds us how much the school system itself has woven its way into our lives. For example, reading and school are so tied up together that we have taken school's need for early reading and extrapolated it to mean that all children need to read early. And that just isn't true. It's a great example of what deschooling for parents is all about, examining our conventional paradigms to see if they still make sense when school is out of the picture. If you have any thoughts you'd like to add, just head on over to livingjoyfully.ca/podcast and share in the comments for episode 23. And now, on to the interview with Anne. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Laricchia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Anne Ohman. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Pam.
I am really looking forward to digging into the topic of reading with you.
I am so excited too. It's all I've been thinking about, even though I have 100 other things going on in my life.
I know. I really appreciate all the work you've done with me to set this up. I'm really looking forward to it. And as a bit of an introduction to those who may not know Anne yet, she has always unschooled her two boys who are now 25 and 22. She's been writing and speaking about unschooling for many years, starting her email list, Shine with Unschooling, back in September of 2004. So coming up on 12 years. I heard her speak at the Live and Learn conference that year and was, I believe, the first person to join her list when she got home and created it. Over the years since, she's become a very dear friend. She's also hosted conferences and gatherings over the years, and together, starting this year, we host the Childhood Redefined Unschooling Summit. So, just as a first question, can you share with us a bit about your background and your family and how you came to unschooling?
I I would love to. And I've actually been writing about unschooling since 1998. And I love to say that because I love to pull out the 1900s. And I was writing on the only online unschooling forum at the time, unschooling.com. And it's there where we kind of got a core group of people, and that's where Kelly Lovejoy was inspired to host the first Live and Learn Unschooling Conference in 2002, and I spoke at that. So I've been writing and speaking since way back then. And also I've been a student of my children and how they learn through life simply from being who they are since the day they were born. And mostly because when Jacob was born, he did not accept any mainstream notion of what a baby should be like. He did not read that manual that mainstream society was handing out. And he let me know that he was going to be who he was here to be. And I rejoiced in that. And I was so grateful for that. And I listened to, celebrated, and followed that. And then Sam came 3.5 years later, and Dave and I had two amazing life gurus to follow and learn from.
That's a great way to look at it, right? 'Cause it's, I know once my children were here and seeing them in action, they really let you know what it is that they needed versus, and it was so often so different from all the messages that were coming from outside.
Oh, exactly. Even from, what the gifts I got at my baby shower, nothing was in my house because it was all about, how to keep your baby at a distance and everything. And so it's cool. It's cool to follow the child and the child letting us know.
Yeah, that's super. So let's shift to reading now. School, and by extension society, is very laser focused on children learning to read as early as possible. So as a rural library director and unschooling parent, I would love to hear your perspective on how you've seen these reading expectations play out.
Okay. Well, first of all, I love how you said rural library director. It's like the hardest 3 words to say together. But of course, when we have any expectations on our children and we don't trust in them to live and learn in their own way and in their own time, they can feel that. So here we are, an entire society, which does include school and libraries where I work, collectively holding this expectation about children reading early and often. And not only holding that expectation, but creating programs and incentives and rewards and punishments around this expectation. And if we back up to see why society does this, it's really obvious. We talked about this before. Schools need children to read. A quick Google search will tell us that children reading early has a direct correlation to academic success. Of course it does. How can teachers teach children what they're expected to be teaching without children being able to read? The only method a classroom has of expanding a child's world is by way of reading. And there's lots of ways they do that. Books, handouts, tests, what's written on the chalkboard. Do they use chalkboards now still? I don't know.
And some kind of board.
Some kind of board. It's all the written word. And so, we see how this equation is necessary. The equation being the expectation of early reading equals academic success. And the cool thing is that we as unschooling parents get to remove the academic success part of the equation because that's never our focus. Our focus is on the child and the whole child. So when you remove academic success, there's not an equation anymore. So the expectation of early reading falls away as well. And now we can allow the child to learn and grow and perceive the world in their own way, in their own time, and offer them the greatest gift we can offer unschooled children, which is trust. And my view of all of this from a library perspective actually began years ago before I was a library director in 2002. Jacob was 11 and Sam was 8, and the universe put an opportunity in front of me to start a parent-child library program in our little local rural library. And I said yes to it because my kids were older and they didn't need me as often, and I wanted something that I love to do, and I also knew it was something they could join me in or not and be involved with it as much or as little as they wanted to. And yet from the very beginning, to fund the program, I had to apply for grants. And filling out the library grant forms made me want to just run back to my free unschooled 10 mountaintop acres at home.
I can imagine.
We've never been able to fit our unschooling lives and our visions into standard forms, and that's like making a resume. We have to get really creative, but this form didn't allow the space to do so. It had so much mainstream schoolish vernacular, and they wanted specific methods and the specific numbers I would reach and how many would be readers at the end of my project. They wanted to see results. And it totally conflicted with my vision and desire to simply bring parents and children together in joy and in celebration of wonderful children's picture books and simple creative crafts. And therefore, my grant applications all got turned down, probably because I didn't speak their language. But then a friend of mine told me, who was involved in me watching me do all this, she lives in New York City and at a summer home here. When her husband's mother died, she had left them money to give to rural towns to promote literacy. And she knew me and she knew my kids. And she didn't want to give me the money to promote literacy. She wanted to give me the money to do what I do. And that's to share my joy and my appreciation of children and books. So thankfully, for many years, she generously funded my ParentChild library program. And because we were a little rural library and the library director trusted me, I had the freedom to create a program without society's expectations and pressure to make sure children were reading books or learning to read. So I had all these wonderful things happening where I didn't have any restraints placed on my vision according to society's expectations, which was fantastic. So I walked into that library with my knowledge of how children learn through joy and through life. And that's what I manifested, my vision of joy. It was funny because after my very first program, the local school supportive parents did not return because they were not happy that I did not make their children sit and be quiet and listen to the story. Instead, I, of course, encouraged children's interaction. I encouraged their conversations. I encouraged them to get up and point things out in the book. When I finished reading a book, I always wanted to know how they felt about the book, and they knew I wanted their honest opinion. And, parents don't want to hear that. They want to hear that the child liked the book. So even for the craft, I always said when I made the craft, I would say, this is what I made from these materials. You're free to make whatever you want from them. So that's the whole feel of the library program. And was cool as those disapproving parents dropped out, in through the doors would walk parents who had driven from over an hour away saying one or both of the following things. I heard your story time was fabulous, and or I heard you homeschool your children without a curriculum, and I want to know more about that. So, that was so awesome. And so my library program was basically filled with homeschoolers and unschoolers and a couple of parents who were going to send their kids to school too, but who appreciated my joyful connection with their kids. And I had kids of all ages there because it was so family friendly, ranging from babies to Jacob, the oldest at 11, and then 12, 13, and 14 as we continued the program. And what was so beautiful was how we created this fabulous community. Jacob and Sam would sit in the back of the small children's room in little kid chairs and play their Game Boys. Yes, was it Game Boys back then? I don't know.
Yeah.
2002, maybe. And there was a young boy who idolized my boys, and he brought his Game Boy too. He's 18 now. And I can still see the three of them sitting in the back of the room, quietly playing while listening to me read books, laughing at the books and commenting on them, along with all the little kids who were on the floor pillows. And after the books were finished, you would just see this community, the smallest of children, being read to by older children, being helped out on the computer by the older children, all ages doing the crafts together and helping each other, coming up with amazing things. And this was exactly why those grant applications and society's conversation about getting kids to read was a foreign language to me, because this is all I needed to create. I knew this from our own home, our own free unschooling home, this space of freedom and joy and trust. And so here I was with this early childhood literacy program, and it was filled with kids who couldn't read, even some of the older unschooled kids, and never was there one bit of focus placed on that. The focus was on their joy. So that was my first foray into a library world. And fast forward all these years later, when the universe put this opportunity in front of me in 2014 to be a rural library director. And I wanted this job so bad that I knew I could take whatever reading regulations the library system handed to me and make them my own. I knew that my presence there as an adult who celebrated children and saw them through the lens of joy would be valuable. And so I wasn't dreading checking off the, quote, literacy boxes. For a small example, this year's summer reading program theme, there's a theme every year, is on your mark, get set, read. After I groaned when I first saw that, and I did some work on it, I kind of held on to it, and I ended up making a fabulous flyer. And last week I was showing my board of directors my summer program flyer, and I pointed out to them that kids understand when we're trying to get them in the library to read. And that's never been a goal of mine. So I want kids to come into the library and simply feel like they're happy at the library, that they're seen and heard. And so my flyer does have the tagline, on your mark, get set, read. And that's where I describe my very easy reading program, where kids can list any book they've read, even if it's just one book, and they put a thumbs up or thumbs down sticker next to it. So because I want them to know that I care, again, about how they felt about the book. That matters to me more than simply the fact that they read a book. And then on the flyer, I also have on your mark, get set, create. And I list the events where we'll be making things. I have on your mark, get set, explore. And I list the times where we'll be exploring cool science toys and games. I have on your mark, get set, watch a movie. On your mark, get set, eat ice cream for our annual ice cream social. And at the bottom of the page, I say, most importantly, on your mark, get set, have fun at the library. And that's what matters the most. And my board approved.
Yay. Wow. Yeah, that is so cool. The way you were able to, it's something that we learned to do over the years, right? Take the conventional perspective, but see so much of the bigger picture for it. And, it doesn't mean we have to, erase or get rid of that, but we can expand the vision so much more, right?
That's exactly it. I know. And that's it always takes an initial groan, and then...
Yeah.
Then the expansion happens, and I'm like, oh, I can invite the rest of the world into the summer program, even though, the library system is saying it's got to be this. But yeah, how can we not invite the rest of the world? That's what we do.
Yeah. And speaking of the kids that you're inviting into the library, I know since you started there that I've really enjoyed reading some of the stories that you've shared on Facebook about the school kids that come to the library and how you've seen their outlook on reading change over time. I was wondering if you could share some of those stories.
I would love to. And I have 3, and they're all about the same little girl, and I'm going to call her Jay. And I don't know, again, these are from Facebook, so I'm not sure of the order that they're in, but they're all really, really cool. This first one says, my 9-year-old foster care after-school friend, who can be very challenging at times in her quest to be seen, heard, and loved, has been using our library's search computer lately. She doesn't know what she's searching for. She types words into the search that she sees on the computer, like search. Yes, she'll type the word search into the search. And then she'll type the word subject into the subject search. And she comes up with amazing things. The other day, she pulled every single nonfiction cat book we had off of the shelf. Her enthusiasm and excitement were so beautiful that it almost didn't even cross my mind that I would have to reshelve all of those books. Do you know how she found every single nonfiction cat book we have? she taught herself the Dewey Decimal System. She figured out on her own what the numbers after the book subjects meant. She didn't know how to look for them. It didn't matter because as soon as I heard her going to the shelves and saying the numbers out loud, I left my desk and my work and I went to her and I asked her if she wanted some help. And yes, she did. And we started to look for the books together. Today, I walked by her on our search computer and again, she was typing subject into the search. I smiled. And then she started spelling things to me, asking me what they said. I just wanted to make sure today that she wasn't looking for something specific, so I asked her if there was something that she was interested in finding. She said, I am interested in finding, and then she took a scrap paper and pencil and wrote down these words and ran over and handed it to me. It said, Canada in pictures. And then she then said, it's number 971. We went looking for it together. I pulled it off the shelf and she squealed when I showed it to her. That's my first story. My second story, let's see. 9-year-old Jay brought a school library book to me today, complaining, I'm supposed to read this in 20 minutes or I'll be in trouble and I can't read these words. I asked, who told you that? Her foster mother. I looked at it. It was the most boring picture book in the world. It was about wild ponies, which could be interesting, but this book was not at all. I thumbed through it and I told her it looked to me like it was a difficult book to enjoy. I pointed to a word. I pointed to a word and I said, I don't even know how to say that word. I said, the fact that you can't read this has nothing to do with how smart you are. If you had a book you were interested in, you'd be able to read it because you'd want to read it. What about if I read this to you? Yes, that was fine with her. So I started. It was just too boring. While I was reading, I started saying blah, 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 blah. And then I was skimming. When I read the words, they were too boring. And when I read the words, Jay said, can you just say blah, blah, blah there too? So I asked her, does it have to be this book? She said she chose it because she was in a hurry and she doesn't have another book. We're in a library, I said. Let's go find you a book you will like. We did. She took it, left my side, and went to the table to read it. She was back very soon, laughing. She said, giggling, I have to read this to you. It's so funny. There were words she didn't know, but she figured them out because she loved the story. She was so into it. And she read the whole thing in less than 20 minutes and then read it again to me, laughing. That's my second story.
Wow.
My third story is called Discovering Madeline. Madeline. Is that the book, Madeline? Yes.
Yeah.
Realizing I never said that word out loud. This one's similar to the other one, and it starts, she showed me the book the teacher gave her to read for homework. She trusts me to be honest with her about such things. I said it looked long and maybe a little interesting, but not very. We laughed. She opened it up and showed me a page and said, exasperated, ugh, look at all these words. I asked her if she had to read that book. She said no, but she didn't have another. Again, I looked to my left, I looked to my right. Yep, we're both standing in a library. I suggested she start looking for another book. I told her I'd help her when I was done with my work. I wanted to give her some space first. She came back after a few minutes and showed me her book, Mad About Madeline, The Complete Tales of Ludwig Bemelmans. Yes, all of the Madeline books in one big treasure of a book. I expressed my joy that she discovered a book on her own. This is a huge thing that I believe strongly in, allowing children the space to discover in a library. She most certainly did not notice that there were just as many words in that book as in the homework book, and that's because she chose this book. Her heart was drawn to this particular book, and she was curious and enthusiastic about opening it up and reading it. She started reading on her own while I continued working. She was incredibly delighted. She was excited. She was in love. She would run over to show me pictures, to read an excerpt to me. And then she would stop reading, pick up the book and walk around the entire library, hugging the book and singing, "I love this book so much." I was thrilled. I was laughing at her joy. I asked her, "Do you love Madeline?" I thought she was in love with the character, and I love how clear she was in her answer. "No, I love the pictures in this book, and I love the words in this book." She wanted to check the book out, but because of her home situation, she's a foster child, it was not a good idea. We found a special place to keep it there at the library where no one else would be able to find it and no one else would be able to check it out. And she knows her book is waiting there just for her whenever she comes in. The end.
Yeah.
I miss her.
Oh, I can imagine. Wow. What a beautiful glimpses into the journey when it's in their control, right?
Exactly. And just the simplicity of what all we need to offer them. You know what I mean? It's so simple and it's so downstream compared to, schools just going against the flow and fighting and trying to get them to do this and this and this when, look at what I offered her, and it was completely just taken over with joy and ease.
You know what I wonder, what I'd like to talk about actually is why is it that we see the society getting so caught up in reading by a certain age, such that if they're not, the adults just seem to keep focusing on just that missing piece. They don't see the whole picture of the child. They just see not reading, and not reading.
Exactly. And that's it just goes back to their requirement of having reading be the only way they can teach, basically. And that gets ingrained in parents, and even unschooling parents have trouble letting that go sometimes, and children learn from the time they're young when they're free and trusted, and it's the same with reading. And yet, once kids get to a school age, parents start to panic and just go back to all they've ever known, schools requirements. And I did a conference talk, as you know, at your conference and at a Live and Learn conference called "This is Where Unschooling Lives." And this is available, by the way, on Pam's website. And I have a short excerpt about Sam and his journey to reading, because, and I hate saying these words because it just sounds so negative and it goes against my whole focus, but Sam was a late reader. And I talked a lot about it in that talk. And there's also my other talk, What's So Radical About Radical Unschooling, has a lot in it about Sam's journey to reading also. But this short excerpt here just describes our entire family's energy about it. I wrote, "My son has been on this journey toward reading for years now, and the focus in our family has never been to get to the end point where my child is reading. Our lives were, as always, focused on his strengths, on his joy, his passions, all that he was and all that he could do. In our family, we allow the light of our children to blind us to what society may define as a lack. We don't see lack because our vision is filled with the glory of who our children are." And that's exactly how our lives have always been.
And that's such a huge piece, right? That lack that everybody sees. So let's talk about how our kids have learned without reading.
Cool.
Yeah. Because it doesn't get in their way, does it?
Exactly. And it's just what I said. Learning is it's in everything that they do. And I always felt with reading, I always called it a puzzle. And I feel like children are picking up pieces of the reading puzzle everywhere along the way. We're surrounded by words, signs, and the grocery store is filled with words and everything. And so they're picking up these pieces here and there throughout their lives. And they're either holding on to them or they're discarding them if they're not ready for them. And they're laying them down in a way that makes sense to them in that moment. And they might not be at a place yet, where those pieces fit into the bigger reading puzzle picture. So they just continue to keep turning those pieces around, like we get the pieces to fit into the puzzle. And I've witnessed that I don't know, you probably have too, that it hasn't really kept our kids away from doing what they really want to be doing. And it's because we have this environment where they're celebrated for being who they are and we follow what they love, that they don't feel like, it impairs them because they can't read. They'll go to a video game or a game or whatever that has a lot of reading in it, and they'll just keep going forward and finding different ways to get the information they need. They're industrious when they really want to do something. We haven't told them they can't do it because they haven't followed society's standard steps along the way to get there. We haven't led them to believe they need to learn the alphabet before they could make words. You know what I mean? So, as you know from your kids, our kids show us over and over how they're full-fledged participants in the real world. And Sam, when I laugh every time I think of this, he was such a little kid and wanting to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game in tournaments. And so we would drive him an hour away to these tournaments, and there were all these older kids, really big kids, like drinking 2-liter jugs of soda as their drinks. and there was little Sammy wanting to do tournaments with them, and nobody knew he couldn't read, and yet he was able to understand what the cards said, and Jacob would stand there by his side, and Sam would just look up to him if he needed help, and Jake would read the card to him. And those cards are very complex with very big words in it, and because he knew what the card would do, he would know what the card said. So
yeah, you know what? I love that. It's a piece because we don't have the expectation and they don't feel the lack of not reading. They just take what they want to do and use the skills that they have. They do things in such different ways than we would. I'm going to go back that second. And when reading comes up, they know that we'll help them if that's, if they need some help to read something, Jake standing there to help him out if he needed. They know that they have that support as well. Because I always remember back when Michael was younger and wasn't reading yet, and he really loved to play the game Clue, right? And so me, analytic mind, right? I've got the Clue sheets, it's where you can tick off what people have asked, what you think people have. And I would I'd say, hey, Mike, you want me to? Because I'm pretty good at forgetting as well. People will spoil. I'll tell my kids they can spoil me for a TV show or whatever, because by the time I watch it, I won't remember. No problem. Because they want to talk about it. No, sure. Tell me all about it. I won't remember. But he never wanted me to help him out with reading there. And he used the skills that he had at the time. His memory was really developed, whether or not it was because he wasn't, as part of not reading or whatever. Those other skills that they that come more naturally to them. Those things are what they can rely on because nothing is actually holding them back. Again, back to that lack word. And he would win the games very regularly, having just memorized and remembered what people have asked, what clues he's gotten. And I was just always so flabbergasted by that.
Yeah, exactly. I've always been in awe of their unreading minds. It just seems like a more clear picture of the world where it doesn't have all these labels on everything. You know what I mean? They can interpret everything in their own way and the way they want to see the world instead of having it all labeled with words and knowing what those words say. It's so funny because just yesterday at the library, of course, this is what happens in our lives that I'm going to be talking about reading today. So I've gotten to tell patrons stories yesterday. A woman came in and checked out some children's books. Actually, no, she bought children's books from our book sale that were left over. And she said to me, now, if I can only get my grandson to sit by me and read, that would be a major accomplishment. And I told her about how Sam never wanted to sit and read books. Jacob did. So we would come home with a stack of children's books, and Jacob and I would sit and read and read and read. And Sam would be nearby playing and creating and destroying and imagining and moving and moving and moving. And he was also listening. And this is something else that, another piece of how they're learning and absorbing that society tends to not see and forget about. The way some kids learn differently or hear differently and retain things differently. And we've also had audiobooks going whenever we got into the car, because everything around here you want to go to is at least 20 minutes away. So like you were saying about, Michael's mind, it was the same. I felt the way about Sam's comprehension and memory of every specific of audiobooks. I mean, he can still quote Maniac McGee, and he was so young when we listened, and it's just, I'm in awe.
Yeah, and you know what? That was one of the big challenges for Joseph when he was in school. And his teachers really couldn't get it because they were sure he wasn't paying attention. Because he would be busy playing with a pencil, eraser, something, he would be busy doing things. And then, I remember the principal telling me a story of she walked by, he looked like he wasn't paying any attention. She pulled him out, asked him what the teacher was talking about, and he told her word for word. And they were just like, I don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
It's just...
there was a young adult in the library. Well, there was another little girl who is an unattended child in the library, and I had that Thinking Putty. I forget what the brand name is, but I love this is the magnetic stuff. And I asked her if she wanted to play with it with me. So we were playing with it, and then this young adult walked by, and he was drawn to it. And so I kind of planted some seeds. I'm like, I play with this when I need to listen to something, and I feel like I'm going to get bored if I just sit there and listen. And if I have this to play with, then my brain works better. And I just wanted to instill these little things, kind of validating that they have to sit and listen when things are boring, and and let them know that it's okay to feel like you want to be doing something else. So the three of us are just playing with this putty and stretching it and everything, and it was the greatest experience. And they both understood that, hey, yeah, doing this would really help, with how my brain works.
Yeah, and then there's the other piece, how society seems to value books and book learning over all the other ways.
Exactly.
We would have so much fun going to the science center and museums and everything, and the hands-on exhibits, and what we talked about on the Q&A a couple episodes ago, YouTube University, Anna called it. There's just so many ways to learn things beyond the written word not reading does handicap kids in school as they get older, because that's the only way that information is given to them. Yet when you have the world that you can explore, there's just so many other ways that kind of information is available, and it really does not put you behind.
Exactly. And still, such an important part also is how we, exactly that, we don't place an emphasis on it. And I'm surrounded by parents who are just praising their child when the child reads something, at the library. And then, of course, a child gets shamed when they're not reading. And, it's so foreign to us in our lives. And not only is it not good, but it's hijacking their own experiences, where our children are allowed to own their own experiences. And again, their interpretation of everything. And we are continuing living our lives being surrounded by the written word and having conversations, and there's so much more going on. And even with learning in all the other ways, there's still those pieces of that reading puzzle that they are picking up when they are ready to pick it up and placing it. And maybe the whole reading puzzle isn't complete yet, but those pieces are constantly being picked up when they're ready.
Oh, I know. It's so beautiful to watch over the years. And I wanted to ask you about something, because this is something that I've seen over the years. And I noticed it, with, Joseph was reading by the time he left school. although he was reading at a much more advanced level than they saw at school, right? Because they have grade level books and they were not interesting. And as far as the teachers were concerned, he was just, barely reading. Yet at home, he was reading 100-page printouts of walkthroughs for video games written by adults, right?
Exactly.
But anyway, so I've noticed that unschooling children are often more apt to call themselves readers once they're comfortably reading adult level books versus those grade level things. Have you seen that too?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. In fact, like in the excerpt from my talk that I did, I believe I say, Sam's not reading super strongly right now because, as I've been saying, he's got a lot of the pieces of the puzzle there, and they're just not all there. And yet, once the pieces are all there, they can dive into anything. Jacob was 9, I guess, when the first Harry Potter book. I think Jacob was almost 9, and we were in a bookstore, and he was so drawn to it, and I picked it up and I looked at it. Knowing he was sensitive about cruelty in books, and I was reading what it was about, and I was like, I don't know about this book, Jake. I'm like, this boy's made to live in a cupboard under the stairs. I don't know. So I said, let's check it out from the library before we buy it to make sure you like it. And so we did. And, there was no waiting list for it back then because nobody had heard of it before. It was like the day it came out. And so we got home with it, and I apparently was not available enough to read it to Jacob as much as he wanted me to read it to him. And so one time I got up from reading to make dinner or whatever, and he took the book and just kept on reading it himself. And he didn't know he could read, and he just started reading that book. And Sam, the first book he read on his own, I believe, was the graphic novel Watchmen, which is an adult book also. And that was also really interesting because it revealed a lot about how Sam's brain worked and maybe why other pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting. They weren't the right pieces at all. He needed, some visual with it. So that was really cool.
Oh, that is fascinating. And I will link in the show notes because Lissy's reading story is intricately woven with Harry Potter as well. So that might be interesting for some people to read. I have a question for you. Have you had anyone judge your kids for not being able to read?
Well, as an unschooling family, as I've said this so many times before, we've just kind of lived our lives when we've been around other people and not allowed any space for judgment to be inserted into our lives. We've always, focused on our passions, our interests, and what we're doing when we're around other people. So for the most part, no, because there was no space for that. But I do remember one instant when we were kind of nervous about Sam might being judged. It was actually, I hope she doesn't listen to this. The library director who gave me the job as for the Parent-Child Library program, her daughter, she and I were such good friends, and she was older than Jacob, maybe by 4 years or so. God, no, can't be that old now. Anyway, this was when they were all very young, and we had become good friends and laughed together and everything. And so we invited her to the river to go kayaking once. So she came to spend the day with us. And after we had been kayaking, we were in our cabin. We were going to play apples and apples to apples. And we all kind of had a meeting before, and how, Sam might not want to reveal that he can't read. And I just said, okay, I'm thank you for telling me you're sensitive to that. I'll work it out so that we can still play this game. And so I'm making food, and they're setting up the game and everything. And I'm saying all these things, we're talking, and I said, somebody needs to sit by Sam who can help him read his cards. And then I just continued to talk and create and stuff, and didn't allow any space for any judgment in that moment. But I know she probably, was struck by the fact that Sam wasn't reading his cards. And yet she saw how it just kind of flowed, went right along with just one simple thing about Sam, and she knew all these things about Sam with having spent the day with him. Sam loves kayaking. Sam's really funny. Sam's hungry for lunch, and so this thing that Sam couldn't read just kind of went in and out as one of those things. And that's how the game progressed. Sam got help reading his cards, and she went home that day, and her mother reported to me that Brianna had said it was the best day of her life. So that's how small that piece was in the entirety of the day, and which is really exemplifies how small it is in our lives,
Yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest pieces for me too, out and about, with the extended family, with other people in the world. For those pieces that we know don't match up with the more conventional lifestyle is to live it in front of them, not leave the opening. Because, there's an energy to it too, right? Where you kind of say something, the way you phrase it, and then as you almost like sit back and people feel like you're kind of expecting them to say something. Whereas
Right.
if you come up and it's just a fact, and I'm sitting beside him and I'm helping him with that, and we're all having fun, and this is how we do it, you're showing them that this other way is totally fine. That's worked so well for me over the years.
Yeah, I had a similar incident yesterday with that young adult in the library. He was talking about how he needed to do the 5-hour driving class to get his license. And I happened to have a poster in my foyer, and I said, come with me to my foyer. So I showed him the poster, and I made a copy of it for him. And then I said, Jacob might be in your class if you take this. And he's like, what? Jacob, your son? And I said, yeah. He goes, how old is he? I said, he's 25. And he said, he doesn't have his license yet. And I said, very casually, no, he hasn't felt the need to. I know people have gotten their license when they're 40. He said people drive him. His brain works differently. And we talked about how people learn things differently. And then Jacob walked over from his house next door, and we all started talking about it. It's just that energy in which you say, their shock value doesn't go anywhere. It kind of bounces off of us, and we still stick to what's really important in seeing the entire person, not just this one small piece of what they define as a lack, and we don't.
Yeah, it is all about. We've had those same kind of driving things come up here and there too, because Michael's in the process of doing his, and he's 18. He'll be 19 next month, versus a 16 where everybody throws their kid in the car and says, you need to learn to drive so I don't have to drive you everywhere.
Exactly. Well, and plus kids want to drive away from their parents too. So, they want to their parents, and we do so many things together, and so it's I didn't feel the need to list all the reasons to explain myself. I wanted to give him information though, so that he could take it out and maybe examine the way he judged so quickly.
Yeah, because that's it. If you start like explaining yourself, then that can put the moment more confrontational, right? Because then they feel the need to explain themselves. But just as things come up in conversation, because so often they're curious, and just having a normal conversation with them, and just to say, Michael's my youngest, and he'll be the first child to drive. It's not something Lissy actually started. She did her the first stage. It's a graduated license here, but then she moved to New York City, and there's no need for driving there. And and it's not something Joseph's ever been interested in. When we drive him, when he comes places with us, he gets motion sick, and 10 minutes into it, he's not feeling well. So driving isn't something that interests him either. So it's all individual, right?
It is. It's so cool.
Yeah. And so for our last question, I was wondering how you feel now when you look back at Sam's journey to reading.
Oh, Sam is one of the most intelligent people I know. I wish everybody listening here could hear Sam explain the entire Star Wars series to me. He just has... his brain is able to retain so much information, so many details. And oh my God, something happened yesterday with a TV show that I watched that Sam doesn't even watch. and yet had obviously been in the room when I was watching it and made a reference to something years ago and connection. And I honestly believe that the non-reading mind is a bonus. And I don't want to say that because some people do read early. So I'm just going to rephrase that and say trusting in children to learn when they are ready, because you can't push that and you don't want to push that. You want to look at it and celebrate it, celebrate the mind that can see things in its own way, interpret things in its own way. And as we've been talking about, there are just so many ways for them to be in the world fully and still not be, have all of the pieces together in the reading puzzle. Right now, Sam is never without a book. And recently started listening to audiobooks again, and we had a conversation about it, and he was talking about how much of a gift it is to have someone read books to him. It's really cool. And I just have one little story. When Sam is a chef, and when he had a job as a cook at a really nice restaurant in Hudson, New York, I found out that his favorite author, Neil Gaiman, was in Hudson with his wife Amanda Palmer, and they were doing a tour of upstate New York independent bookstores. And I'm like freaking out. I'm texting Sam saying, Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer in Hudson, leave work and go see them. And he's like, yo, Mom, I work in a restaurant. I don't see daylight. I don't have time. So I'm like, I'm driving there right now. So I calmed down about it. And then later on, Sam texts me, guess who walked into his restaurant? Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer and a bunch of people. So Sam got to cook for them. And the chef of Sam's restaurant brought Amanda Palmer back into the kitchen to meet all the cooks. And he said to her, your husband is Sam's favorite author. And, I think of that moment all the time when I think of the importance we put on reading. Do you think anybody in that moment cared one iota that Sam didn't read when school and society expects children to read? It kind of puts it all in perspective. What really matters in the long run? What story do we want our children to own about their journey to reading? And I think my kids' stories are amazing. And I think even if Sam had said, if conversation had come around to Sam talking to Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer about when he learned to read, I think they would have been fascinated and in awe themselves, So I just love holding on to that perspective.
I really love that perspective too, because the journey is what matters. It does, the timing of it, the expectations from outside surrounding it, none of that really matters. The whole point is their journey and where they are and how they bring reading into their lives. Maybe it becomes a big piece of it, maybe it doesn't, but it's all about their life and their wishes and their needs. So that's just beautiful.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I just wanted to say also that I referenced this before in the conference talk that is available on your website, the Toronto Unschooling Conference Talk, what is so radical about radical unschooling. I talk about a time when I had casually asked Sam if he was opposed to anything having to do with reading because he had groaned about reading directions on a box or something, brownies that he wanted to make or something. And that's really a good thing if you want to listen to that talk, because maybe our kids don't want to read, you know what I mean? And it doesn't matter if they, it doesn't matter one way or the other. It's not that they can't read or whatever. Maybe they just don't want to read right now. Like I said, Sam's enjoying having audiobooks being read to him. So, that's just a matter of personal desire sometimes.
I know, and it's just our fears wrapped up in the expectations, like that we take the, I don't feel like reading a box right now, and we're like, oh my God, they're never going to like reading, right?
Right, yeah, exactly, I know. And
And
it's just, and that's why we offer to help. And it was just so funny because that one day I was just joking and I talk about, I had to examine it myself if it was a loaded question, did I mean it to not be a joke and everything? So I looked at, as we should always do, look at what we are owning and what we are handing to our children. So.
And as you mentioned audiobooks, because I'll just add too that that's been something that Michael and I have really connected over, because I'm driving him into towns like 10-15 minutes away, the dojo, and we go most nights of the week, and he and I listen to audiobooks in and out. We're listening to Everything is Illuminated right now.
Oh, cool.
And it's just something that really we can connect over and share experience with. And it doesn't have to be about reading. Yet, you know what? A few days ago, he likes to skateboard, longboard, or bike into town every once in a while. And he's been hanging out at the library now. When they were younger, we used to go a lot, and I had a library card, and we'd come out with, tons and tons of books. Although at that time he wasn't reading, so it wasn't, he would come and hang out because it was a fun place, and he might play on the computer, but books weren't a big thing for him at the time. And the other day he's like, oh, I spent an hour in the library reading such and such a book. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, you could get your own card and bring it home. And the next time he went, he did. He signed up for a card and he came home with the book. And it was just pretty funny. And he had almost finished it. So he finished it, like 2 days later. And then yesterday he was getting a ride with a friend into town. He's like, oh, let me grab the book. And he took it back and he came home with another one. And it's like,
cool.
Age doesn't matter. It's their own.
The library. Yeah. My library is 18 minutes away from home. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I come home for lunch. And so I get about 80 minutes of somebody reading me a book in that one day. And that's fantastic. And I'm also testing books that way, because I know my patrons and I know what they like and everything. So I'm a library director who doesn't read a book often, a physical book, because I fall asleep when I start to read it. And my life is so busy with other things once I don't have my library director hat on. So the audiobooks is just so perfect. And I can talk about it, with the patrons and everything. And so I just love it. I love having it read to me. It's got to be the right reader though,
Oh, that really helps.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
You're done. I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today, because, I guess we could go on forever and ever, but I just love talking about reading with you.
Yeah, I know. It's been so fun. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I loved it.
Me too. And before you go, where's the best place for people to connect with you online?
Well, I am always on the Shine with Unschooling Yahoo list. I have a Shine with Unschooling Facebook page, and I'm going to have a Shine with Unschooling website up soon, but I would love to connect with people in real life at our Childhood Redefined Unschooling Summits. That would be fun.
Oh, that's a good one. Yes, and I will include links to all those things in the show notes. Well, thank you very much, Anne. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Pam. You too. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes at livingjoyfully.ca/podcast. You can also get your free Exploring Unschooling ebook at livingjoyfully.ca/exploring unschooling. If you'd like to connect, you can also find me on Facebook at Living Joyfully. Until next time, have fun living and learning with your family.